the shooting range. Before we start, here's a quick announcement. The next episode of The Shooting Range will be out on Sunday the 28th of January. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell so you don't miss it. In this episode, the Somua S-35, how the French created their best pre-World War II tank. The Middle East, let's take a look at one of the new maps. Hotline, the developers answer questions that you've left in the comments. But first, let's start with the surprisingly fast Lorraine 40T and how to play it. We continue the examination of the most interesting machines from the update 1.75. Next in line is a Tier 4 vehicle called Char de Bataille de 90 tonnes, or simply the Lorraine 40T. In post-war France, they wanted to create a middle tank that would serve as a more powerful analogue of the German Panther. The Lorraine prototype, with an oscillating turret, was the lightest and the fastest, so the company got the contract. But they managed to assemble only 2 copies of this tank before the initial order changed completely. The silhouette of this tank sends a clear message. This is totally not an ambushing type machine. You can't hide this. On the other hand, you don't even have to, as your most valuable advantages are your speed and a deadly 100mm weapon with a drum autoloader. In RB and SB, you can drive as fast as 40 to 45 kilometers per hour from a maximum of 60, which almost guarantees you beating everyone to the capture point. And in arcade, you can go even faster, up to 65 kph. Just remember that at this pace it's really easy to lose control and go accidentally skidding, opening your sides to enemy fire. As for the weapon, you've got a 100mm gun shooting 2 types of shells and piercing 226mm of armor from 100 meters. This is enough to destroy almost any target on its current BR. The autoloader holds 7 shells and reloads them in 7 seconds. Keep in mind that after 7 shots you have to wait a lot longer, for 38 seconds. You will see this driving any French tank with an oscillating turret, so the next piece of advice works for all of them. Forget about HE shells. Completely. Use only the APC-BCs, especially with the Lorraine's precise gun, and also given the fact that the turret rotates at a very good speed of 30 degrees per second. Now let's talk about protection. We can't really call it armor, because 40mm in front and 30 in the sides and back do not really do it for a post-war Tier 4 tank, especially when 3 out of your 4 crew members reside in the turret. And you don't have any smokes. So you can easily guess our next advice. Play very carefully and don't let the enemy catch you in their sights. If you are already fired at and your gun breech is damaged, or your gunner is dead, retreat as fast as you can. All the more reason to thank engineers for that great speed. So, how do you play this tank? By relying on your advantages, your mobility, and your gun. In the very beginning of the match, rush to the point and capture the hell out of it. After that, don't just stand there. Flank the enemy. Even better if you can get to them from behind. Plan your routes in advance. You don't get the luxury of meeting your opponents face-to-face and surviving. That's why the hardest mode to play this tank is the arcade, where it's almost impossible to stay undetected because of all the markers, and the weak protection makes it impossible to survive any kind of punishment. Yes, the Lorraine 40T is extremely demanding of your skills, but in capable hands, it can wreak some real havoc on the battlefield. And now let's talk about the tank that we've briefly mentioned before, the Somua S-35, and what happened to it. Right after the end of World War I, the French army lost a lot of its fundings, so the cavalry was being motorized very slowly. But by 1931, they came up with specifications for 3 armored vehicle types for recon and battle. At the same time, they started developing their own tanks. They were called armored vehicles because the cavalry obviously couldn't have tanks, right? The Renault company could offer only some mediocre light tanks, so the cavalry command went to the Somua, and it was a very smart decision. The company started working on a new middle tank in 1934, tested the prototype within a year, and in 1936 it was already in service. That was some fast work. The new S-35 had a very modern and somewhat unusual construction. The lowest part consisted of 2 halves with all the inside tech installed before they were joined together. Then, they were also covered with 2 additional armored parts, one in the front and the other in the back. Those could survive a direct hit from the German 37mm gun at middle-range battle distances. At the same time, the 47mm gun of the S-35 could easily pierce any German tank of the time. The vehicle was also pretty agile. The engine didn't have a lot of horsepower, but it had a very high torque. The tank was easily controlled thanks to high-end transmission that allowed turning on the spot, and a comfortable steering wheel for the driver instead of levers. The S-35 wasn't the best in the world if you considered all parameters separately, but it turned out to be a really well-balanced machine. Of course, it had some disadvantages as well, like that one-man turret that we've been talking about in previous episodes. The infantry soldiers and command could laugh their lungs out cracking jokes about the cavalry horses being fed petrol instead of water, but in the end, it was the cavalry who got the best French tank of that time period. Moreover, it wasn't assembled in a number of separate military units like the tanks of the infantry. Instead, the S-35s were built directly with a cavalry division, which resulted in improved combat efficiency. Still, it wasn't enough to stop the nightmare of 1940. After the defeat, the S-35 went to the Germans. They put them to use, installing their own radio sets and reconstructing the commander's cupola. Those tanks fought on the Eastern Front, guarded the home front, and also served as training machines for drivers. In 1944, the French got their hands on the S-35s again and used them to fight the previous owners. Only after the war was over, these old tanks were finally decommissioned. By the way, even before the war began, the French started improving the S-35 and created the S-40. It was sturdier, faster, and lower than its predecessor, and also received a new turret, which was invincible to the German 37mm gun, even up close. The first S-40 tanks were planned to be introduced into service in July 1940, but a month earlier, France capitulated, and none of those made it from the factory line. Still, the defeat didn't mean the French stopped working on this tank series. We've already mentioned in the previous episodes that even while being occupied, the FCM engineers secretly developed turrets for 2 and 3 crew members for the S-40 and reworked its whole construction. The new tank became the SARL-12, with welded hull and a completely new turret with a 75mm gun and a range scope. The French were going to start production of this tank right after they would overthrow the Germans, to help the Allies deal with them for good. But the war lasted longer than expected, and by 1944, when they were finally able to start the production, the SARL-12 became obsolete. And now, let's take a look at one of the new maps from the latest update. Recently, we added 2 new locations for combined battles. One of them is called the Middle East. Some of you are already familiar with that one. It was once a part of the game, during the April Fool's event. Since that time, we've seriously reworked and updated the map, so now is the perfect time to show it to you in all its glory. We get into a Middle East town that's been destroyed by the war. On the streets, there are barricades and abandoned guns. Almost all buildings are damaged. Still, somehow, an uptown garden managed to survive the chaos of war, and the oil derricks near the factory keep doing what they were designed for. The map is quite small and pretty open, despite the urban environment. So, beware of the enemy shooting at you from the other end of the street. But even open locations won't be a problem, as there are 3 underground galleries in the key parts of the map. They are conveniently situated to ease your passage from one capture point to another, and concrete blocks above your head serve as great protection from airstrikes. Now let's take a look at the key points of the map. The A point is right near the mosque. Despite the fact that there are some 1-story buildings around it, this position is quite exposed. If you're in a small tank, you'll be able to take cover in the shadows of the buildings around, but it won't save you from a flanking enemy, so stay vigilant. From there on, we take our trip to the next point. And by the way, here's that underground area we were talking about. Also, don't forget to use your scope before setting out. There may be ambushes ahead. Now, while A is at least partially covered, the B point is even more exposed. There is literally nowhere to hide. You can pick any of these buildings around the point, and the enemy can still attack you from dozens of directions. So you need to approach it with maximum caution, preferably using the smokes. The other strategy here is a bit simpler. Just take the heaviest and the sturdiest tanks you've got in the hangar and run over anyone who gets in your way. Up next is the C point that's found on the factory grounds. You have to be extra cautious on the way there as well, because between the factory and the town, there is an empty road that makes a sitting duck out of any vehicle trying to cross it. But when, or if, you get there, you can find some cover in the 3rd underground gallery that leads right to the center of the C point. Basically, this is the safest place in the whole area. Other places are all exposed. So, if you're playing a light tank and came here first to capture the point, get out as soon as you do your deed. Otherwise, the heavier enemy tanks will get there and you'll be stuck in this underground area until the end of the battle, which doesn't sound like a good time. There are also a couple of interesting places in other parts of the map, like these rocks here. Remember them. A small tank or a tank destroyer that gets here in time can make its opponent's life really very messy. Get ready for the traditional last part of our show, Hotline. Developers answering questions from the comments. The first question comes from Jacopo Perugini. When will we get Italian tanks and Reggiane planes? Hi mate, last time we answered a bit about the Italian planes. In short, you will see some of them this year. As for the Reggiane planes, a few aircraft are in the works right now. Can't give you an exact date though. We'll add them to the game when we're finished with them. Another popular question was sent by H.J. Kim. Gaijin, when will you produce modern tanks? Hello there. We tried introducing modern tanks during the April Fool's event last year, and all things considered, it was a great test. We weren't actually sure how our community would react to that addition. We, of course, saw a lot of comments concerning modern vehicles on our forum, on social networks, and here in the comments as well. But it was the April Fools that cemented our conviction. You liked this experience, so the modern tanks will definitely appear in the game, this way or another. Then there is a quest from a user called Shieldmate. Will you add an international tech tree for countries that don't have enough vehicles for a tree of their own? Hi, mate. Firstly, we've answered this before. The international tech tree idea is very appealing to us, and at some point it will probably make it to the game. So next you're going to ask us, oh, when will this happen? Or what nation will be the first? Let's think. Right now, we have the Italians who haven't got their tanks yet. We continue adding new machines to the Italian aircraft tree as well, and also to all other 6 countries, both ground and air forces. We're also going full speed towards the closed beta of the naval battles and the World War mode launch. So it's quite safe to say that we've got our hands pretty full for the few months ahead, don't you think? This doesn't mean, though, that we don't work on the new nations. As we've said before, it takes a lot of time to find and process all the technical data and historical documents, and we do this work long before we announce anything. We continue gathering information all the time. Depending on how fast we can go and what information gets in our hands first, we will decide on the next nation for War Thunder. This last message comes from a player called Bruno Mikan. Do you know the way to the best tank in the game? Is that this Queen thing? Might want to check the British vehicles then, we guess. That's it for today, but feel free to write your questions in the comments below. We do read them all, and you might see some of them answered in the next episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you on the shooting range.